So it's fair to say I've done one or two videos on driving in the UK, whether it's the traffic numbers, the reason why we drive on the left, the busiest roads, why our roads are so narrow, and everything in between. I've covered a lot of videos when it comes to the UK, basically. A lot of different topics when it comes to motoring here in the good old United Kingdom. But the UK is one of many nations that drive on the left. And the reason for this is because the British Empire, basically, that was spread through the British Empire. So even countries that these days don't drive on the left, they used to drive on the left because they were part of the empire. Nations such as Canada and the United States originally, hundreds of years ago, actually drove on the left-hand side of the road before later switching to driving on the right. A lot of countries still, to this day, even though they're not part of the empire because it's not really a thing anymore, they still drive on the left. Australia, New Zealand, India, South Africa, they all drive on the left. But there's a real outlier when it comes to this, and there are some examples of course, but there's a real outlier when it comes to this in my opinion, and that's Japan, because Japan was never conquered by the Europeans. It was one of the very few nations outside of Europe really not to be ruled by an external European power. So why do they drive on the left? What's going on with that? What's the reason behind that? Because a lot of their neighbours, I mean obviously yes, they are an island nation, but the closest nations to them, South Korea, North Korea, China, Russia, they all drive on the right hand side of the road. So what gives with Japan? What is the reason for this? Well, there's several. Let's get into them. Why does Japan drive on the left hand side of the road? Well, like a lot of things in Japan, it is rooted in tradition, and the main reason why, not too dissimilar to the UK actually, is because of the samurais. Not that the UK has got anything to do with samurais, but our equivalent, the knights, are a leading reason why we still drive on the left. Go check out my video, I explain it more on there. But basically, in Japan, long before the period of where, the car started to come in the late 19th century, we're going all the way back to the 1600s with this. During the Edo period of Japan, between the early 1600s and the mid 1800s, there were strict guidelines on how to actually travel between cities or travel just within cities themselves. And that basically said that you have to travel on the left side of the road, whether you're a pedestrian, whether you're going on a horse and cart. It's just you had to drive on the left. The reason behind driving on the left, well, it's not really well established, but for samurais at least, or at least warriors who had swords, they used to carry their sword on their left side. So you can imagine that most of them were right-handed, as most people are, so they would reach like that and then get the sword out, if they want to start something anyway, or respond accordingly of course. But yeah, that's basically why, because then people would be on their right hand side so they could face them. Not too dissimilar with knights and horses going the other way and stuff like that, it's a similar reason really. And then on top of that, and I haven't really found too much evidence for this, but I would go along with this being true as well, when cars started to come in as well, back in the day, Japan, and I think people who have watched series such as Shogun, which is really good by the way, but the first nation to actually trade with Japan, because Japan was an isolationist nation for very, very long time. The only nation that was actually allowed to trade during that time with them was the Dutch. And back then, even though the Dutch now drive on the right side of the road, you've got Napoleon to thank for that, but back then they used to drive on the left. And you still see this today with their former colony in East Asia, which used to be known as the Dutch East Indies, Indonesia. They still drive on the left to this day. So I imagine having trade with the Dutch as well, who also drove on the left, will have encouraged that. And then later on, obviously trade with countries like the UK. And by the time that they got friendly after the Second World War, let's just give a quick mention with that, because for a long time they were not friends, but when they eventually got friendly with countries like the United States that drove on the right, their infrastructure was already there. They were driving on the left, so why switch? Why change it? We've done it for hundreds of years. So yeah, that's basically why Japan drives on the left. Samurai. And it's never going to change. There's no reason why they change, because if there's one thing you know about Japan, they are very resistant to change in general. But this is not the Politics Chronicle, this is the Motoring Chronicles. So that's the short answer basically. Well, the long way of going around it, but that's the long answer. Short answer basically, it's because they always have, because they're samurai. And they're not going to change it anytime soon. But yeah, for much more videos on the world of motoring, including why people drive on certain sides of the roads and everything in between, keep it tuned right here to themotoringchronicle.com, guys. We'll see you very soon. Have a good one.